All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome. We're here with another best ball draft Wednesday night, 9, a little after 9 p.m. Eastern. Thanks to Chris's dog. We were a couple minutes late. We appreciate you sticking around. Chris, what's up, man? How's it going?
Brian, as Chuck and I have discussed almost every single night we do a show together, it wouldn't be tradition if we didn't start the stream a few minutes late, but happy to talk about some best ball 2023 with you tonight. And it's the best time of year. OTAs have started. We get to take way too early victory laps on every single tweet that we read that confirms our priors while we ignore everything else that goes against what we thought. So it's great.
Absolutely. And for those of you watching live, you may have noticed that we scheduled this for 9:03 to account for that 3-minute potential late buffer. We even exceeded that, so we're exceeding all expectations tonight. So, Chris, what I have up on screen here is the Poodle 2. This is what I tried the draft for last time with Ken on Sunday. However, the first one filled. Is a 20 max contest on Underdog, $7 entry, both fast and slow drafts available. As I said on Sunday, I'm not really trying to waste my Best Ball Mania bullets just yet. But this will be good practice for me to get in some $7. I know you've done a bunch of just overall drafts so far. I'm excited to get into this, and I'm going to enter it. And what I did with Ken, for those who didn't see on Sunday, actually before I enter, we'll talk a little bit. But uh, what I did with Ken, because I hadn't really looked at too much football stuff so far, Chris. I just correlated the shit out of everything, right? Any
Yeah.
15, 16, 17 matchup, and I figured that would at least give me an edge over those who are just drafting normally.
I like the approach. I mean, you're going in armed with, I think, a little bit more information that way than just totally flying blind. And I'm sure, using the new ADP tracker, ADP line movement tool that we have on the Occupy Fantasy website, that kind of helps us just glean a little bit of what the consensus from the field is on the sentiment on these players. And I know your like tournament brain and all these different types of fantasy sport contests probably loves using some of that information here, even flying a little bit blind.
Yeah, actually, so I just pulled it up on screen, and I assume just to make sure, Chris, you have the YouTube page up. You can see my screen, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
so Jerome Ford, I have the Best Ball Mania ADP tracker here. For those of you who missed Sunday's show, this new tool was released this weekend, free for everyone, OccupyFantasy.com. Basically, every morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, it pulls the average draft position for every player in Best Ball Mania 4, the flagship tournament on Underdog Fantasy. And what we do is we look at how each player's ADP has changed over the past 7 days or so. If you watched any of our DFS content, right, you know this goes. We monitor odds to changes, team total changes, money line changes. This is no different, right? So, Chris, I see that Jerome Ford, I think you actually tweeted about him or at least talked about him in some capacity somewhere. He is now the biggest ADP mover over the last 7 days, up nearly, oh, yeah, just over a full round difference now. Uh, what is going on there? So, obviously, we have. The lack of Cream Hunt probably, and I think more and more people finally catching on that Ford is going to be the running back too there.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, the large thing that's driving it. That's the big news story. I did a draft, not on a stream, but on Monday, and then I shared my results in our NFL Discord channel talking about Jerome Ford, one of my late round picks, hitting on that number or on that point that his ADP number has risen by now over a full round. Around then, it was about 10 picks. A couple of my other favorite players early on are right here as well, near the top of this list, Brian. I'm really high on Antonio Gibson from the what is currently still the Washington Commanders. I guess there's a question there
We'll
now.
see how long
That's
that
another
lasts.
subject entirely. And Alexander Madison with the Vikings is another running back I've taken quite a few shares of in the contests I have done so far. A little bit of news that we've been waiting on. It feels like months now. The Vikings seem to be trending in the direction of moving on from Dalvin Cook. So that is why Madison's ADP is rising. I think it's still worth considering him here in the 83 pick range, round 7 roughly. We've done the hard work of doing some division for you and putting round number next to the pick number in the tool here, which I think is pretty cool too.
Yep. And people are just taking that to the extreme, or at least early drafters are, where Ty Chandler, the presumed running back 3 for Minnesota, his ADP's even jumped up 3 spots as a result, thinking, hey, if Dalvin's gone, maybe we get the running back 2. Madison goes down. Now we have a potential really unique player in the playoff round. So, all right, let's go back to Underdog. I'm going to hop in this Poodle 2. tried not to make a fool of myself. I think Ken and I held it down pretty well, so we'll see what we do here. So looks like we're about 2/3 of the way full here, and we'll see what pick we get. We started with Bijan Robinson on Sunday, Chris. I know you and Chuck. I feel like our streams combined, we have enough Bijan exposure already that it's pretty. It just seems unlikely how many opportunities we've had to draft him in these early drafts.
Mid first round, and I mean, if he ends up meeting the expectations, I guess I haven't heard you talk a lot about Bijan, so I'll keep my commentary short here. But if the draft capital matches the offensive play calling that the Falcons had last year, I mean, this should be a smash play, right? I mean, that's really the easiest way to summarize it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just if you look historically at running backs taking the top 10, their average fantasy production is just through the roof. And we already have talks of them using him like Cordell Patterson, which, we always get coaches over hyping how often a player will be split out wide as a running back. But they do have history of using that with Cordero. So we'll see if Bijan can replicate or at least get some of that work. So Chris, we're locked in here. We got the ninth pick overall. So we'll see what we get here. So again, I'm not gonna. We'll draft early off your rankings and some of your projections early. I ask of you if you don't mind helping having the schedule up so we can some correlate some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Ninth pick. So just purely by ADP here, Brian, it looks roughly like we're looking at something like Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown, Austin Eckler. So we'll see what falls to us, but that's kind of those are the players that typically go in that range. So
Cool.
we'll see what we get.
So actually, as I did want to get your opinion on this, as this first round will be slow. So when Ken and I were drafting on Sunday, someone took Garrett Wilson with the fourth pick. This was Best Ball Mania, which obviously is above his ADP. He came back with Brees Hall. Ken and I just had the conclusion that he was a Jets fan, which is always possible. But there is some merit, Chris, to taking a player above ADP to have a unique combination for the later rounds. But again, it's that's a really long vision to have.
I think that's a little, I mean, obviously ask us again in October. That was a joke Chuck and I were making on one of the last shows. But Garrett Wilson at 14.4. I already think it's a little high. Wide receiver 9 on the board. I think he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2 this year in fantasy. I feel like we need to wait and see how Aaron Rodgers decides to divide the targets around in that offense. Obviously, the upside is great. We saw how talented Wilson was with, let's just be nice and say, some poor quarterbacking last year. So if they get anything even close to just league average out of Aaron Rodgers and he maintains a similar share, like again, that's why the sentiment is super high here. I've said a couple times on shows with Chuck, I lean towards Rodgers being closer to the Russell Wilson experiment in 2022 with the Broncos here with the Jets in 2023. I'm afraid I'm not super high on this Jets team this season.
I think that's fair. All right, Chris, we got 15 seconds left. Bijan and Diggs just went ahead of me. Who's the top player on your board?
So you've got Cup, AJ Brown. Let me pull my template up for you, Brian. I do really like AJ Brown the best here out of that group. I like pairing him with Jalen Hurts if we can on the bringback, but I'm curious your thoughts on quarterback. I know historically late round quarterback has been profitable, but we're in a brand new era here, right?
Yeah, and as you can tell, if you've done any early drafts, that is certainly the case. I went ahead and took AJ Brown. One of the things I have noticed watching and doing some of these early drafts is just how often people know about stacking now, right, Chris? How often people
Mhm.
are just pairing up AJ Brown with Jalen Hurts in the 1-2 first and second round. So again, we talk about uniqueness, right? That clearly is a combo that
Mhm.
many people will have, and if that makes a championship round, you're not going to be the only one with an AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts stack.
Yeah.
That was a little bit different last year based on Hurts' ADP and where Brown was going as well. So I'm a little less
So,
inclined to take it, but obviously, if Hurts is the best player on the board, we have plenty of opportunity
yeah.
to get different. So
Now there's some other unique paths we can take here. Let's just quickly talk about some correlations. The Eagles during the playoff slate this season are going to draw the Seahawks in week 15, the New York Giants in week 16, divisional matchup, and the Arizona Cardinals in week 17. So championship round correlation obviously being the priority. The thinking here being like if we can't even qualify that far, it doesn't really matter. So we still want to maximize our points there. At least that's how I look at it, Brian. You could consider maybe having AJ and correlating with one of those other options for the playoff weeks if you don't want Jalen Hurts. That's certainly on the table here.
So I think that's what I'm going to do here, right? So the Giants are one of those playoff teams. Barkley is a fine pick at his average draft position here. And yeah, we'll go with Saquon. We'll get a little playoff correlation. And Ken and I were weaving this elaborate web of playoff matchups, and just had these 3 or 6 or 9 teams in the back of my mind that, as I was drafting, let's break ties towards those teams. So, remind me, Chris, just really quickly again, who Philly plays in those 3 weeks, and then remind me or educate me on who the Giants play in those 3 weeks, and we'll keep
We
those in
got
mind.
absolutely, Brian. So the Eagles have Seattle in 15, the Giants in 16. That will be the semifinals, and the Arizona Cardinals in finals week. The New York Giants play in order the Saints, the Eagles, obviously, and then the Rams.
All right, so we got Seahawks, Cardinals, Giants, and then we got Rams, and I already forgot the first team that the Giants are playing.
Saints,
Saints. Got it. See, all right,
Saints,
memory is
New
eluding me,
Orleans
Chris,
Saints.
at age 36.
That's
Memory.
all right. Oh, hey, it's tough. Beats the alternative, though, as they say. Um, I like the Saquon pick here, definitely. I'm a little leery of the Giants this season. He's probably the safest player on the offense to invest in, though. I just feel like the efficiency ran super hot in 2022. I'm skeptical of it this upcoming season, but any player that should be able to hold off regression is definitely Saquon there.
I mean, I agree, right? If I'm playing a single entry, if I'm playing a high stakes season long league, I agree. I'm probably shying away from some of these Giants players, at least this early until I super dig into it. But as we try to build a portfolio of lineups, as we all know, we try to get exposed to many guys. I'll probably be
Mhm.
underweight anyways, but when in doubt, I'll take the correlation. So if we look here, let's go to the ADP tracker, Chris, and as we look at some of those teams in rounds 2 and 3 that we could take. We have Chris Olave, who will probably be gone by the time it gets back to us. Devonta Smith doesn't make much sense to take him without Jalen Hurts. Um, and we do have DK Metcalf going in round 3. That would provide some correlation for this team already.
That is kind of what was on my radar as well, and we probably should keep our eye on obviously Geno Smith potentially as a quarterback option if we're going to do that. I think that would be a really nice approach here if that's the direction you want to go.
And so now there's a real chance that DK is not here, and he would be the only realistic player in this ADP range that would make sense for our correlation. So if DK is gone, and since I said it out loud, he definitely will be now. Who is the top player left on your board, Chris, in this mid to late round 3?
So I'm a little bit above consensus if we're looking at taking shots that are a little off the beaten path here. I like Terry McLaurin a lot. I'm very, very optimistic on him this season. I have him as my wide receiver 8 overall on the season. I think he's going to be pretty close to the production that we're going to see from players like Jalen Waddle and T. Higgins who go right around this spot. So that would be someone that I would have my eye on. I think something that makes sense in these tournaments, though, is to maybe bet that you can get those types of players closer to their ADP. I'm totally fine with taking the best wide receiver available by ADP otherwise.
Fair enough. And DK immediately goes the second I completed my sentence. And what do you think about? So obviously we always harp on playoff correlation, or at least we have so far, and we see a lot of the industry talk is around that. But certainly there has to be some extra bumps to players who play in the same division, like Scary Terry and Saquon Barkley,
Yep.
because we get two correlated matchups per season with them.
Yeah, we get two shots at high scoring games within the tournament. I mean, this is the big macro point to keep in mind. You're playing 14 individual single week contests against the same 12 player pool in the main round, right? The first, and then those week 15, 16, 17, let's just call them effectively GPPs, small field GPPs, to win a big prize in the playoffs. If you get that far, maximizing your chances at spike weeks by investing in some game environments with your picks correlating, it's something I try to do every single time I draft. It sounds like you obviously agree. So
For sure. So not many guys are left here. We do have Scary Terry, 10 seconds left on the clock. D Hop as well as a correlation pick. I assume you're leaning towards Scary Terry. And and we'll take him. We'll take him here. And I know he's ahead of ADP, but maybe this will get us a little bit unique, right? Again, taking
But that's again unique combinations, right? That's and who knows in 3 months, like maybe that's where he's going. We've seen his. I mean, if we go into the tracker, I think Terry's ADP has changed a little bit. I don't know if it's a dramatic amount.
for sure, but
Up
also just
half a pick, right? So over the last week, so
yeah, I meant to take him. Accidentally took DeAndre Hopkins. So excellent start here. We're
that's
clicking the right players.
to, 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 totally fine. We've got week 17 correlation with AJ Brown there with DeAndre Hopkins, so that works. We did the right thing by accident, probably, and we
We'll
may
probably get
have a
Terry here
chance to get
anyways. Yeah.
Terry on the turn. Yeah.
So
So that's kind of what I was advocating for during some of my word vomit a little bit ago there, Brian. We had some great questions in the Discord this afternoon from one of our long subscribers, Nitro. I don't know if you want me to bring some of those up while we're drafting here, so we can hit on them throughout the show.
yeah, let's go for it.
And I know, like, as far as this best ball is concerned through Underdog, I know you're new to Underdog, but you're not new to season long fantasy football. I know you've played a lot of high stakes tournaments through some other providers before, so I'm sure you've already thought about a lot of these concepts. And we began the show today talking about weeks 15, 16, and 17. I think if you watch most content around the industry talking about best ball contests, right now we focus on week 17 as a whole as an industry. So we're obviously taking that to almost a galaxy brain level by expanding out to those, I guess, quarterfinals and semifinals weeks. What's in your mind the reason why it's important to do that? I think it's probably good to be explicit about this.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is, and it comes down to the contest you're playing as well. As obviously we talk about that in DFS all the time. But if you're playing some of these like 8 men contests or whatever, 3 men, some of the smaller ones, the single entry ones, the prizes aren't nearly as top heavy. The payouts are a lot flatter, and the grand prize isn't nearly as life changing. However, you look at Best Ball Mania, you look at last year, right? You have 2 million to first, massive drop off after that. I mean, these drop offs are bigger than some of the millionaire contests on DraftKings and FanDuel. And in order to make that happen, you're basically taking a winner take all 470-man GPP. And when we talk about football and we play a single week contest in DFS, the easiest way to get to the top, to eliminate the number of things you need to get right, is the game stack. And we talk about this all the time. And so it makes sense to try to apply that same concept here. And we saw that same concept win last year because it does minimize the number of things you need to do to get right. And while there is some scariness for getting through 14 weeks or whatever with having so much correlation, honestly that leads to spike weeks, Chris, and you'll be better off than not. It's the same concept, I think, at least when you hear about consistency with wide receivers, like week to week. Oh, this guy's a boom bust receiver. Tyler Lockett comes to mind. And there have been studies that show that your actual win loss record in traditional season long leagues are better off if you have boom bust players over guys who are have a smaller standard deviation and don't have those spike weeks for you. So yeah, a 0 or 5 from Lockett might kill you, but he almost guarantees you a W when he puts up those 40-point weeks. And I think that same concept applies to best ball, if that makes sense.
No, it 100% does. So I think we're coming up again soon here. Do you have anything that you're itching to take here? Curious your thoughts.
Okay, let's see. So Kenneth Walker, who I do not like very simply at his ADP. But if we talk about spike weeks, he can clearly break touchdowns. So he offers some correlation here. Who else do we have? And no one else really in this range offers correlation. So it's really next best player available. Let's see here. I truly don't mind taking Kenneth Walker. I don't like that two running back start of Saquon and Kenneth Walker is pretty scary to me. But let's see here. Who else is
We'll
available?
say it is. I mean, it is correlated with AJ Brown. We've
Yeah.
got Seahawks in that first playoff week, so there at least is that for you. This is around. We're in the fifth, sixth round here, where Ken and I have both drafted these guys. I'm really high on the Buccaneers wide receivers.
Me
I
too.
actually think this passing game has a chance to be a lot better than people are expecting without the greatest quarterback of all time being there anymore. But obviously, you are in a position here where maybe you're considering going a different path just because you've already got three really strong wide receivers. So, but that's usually where I lean when I am on the clock here.
I think Godwin's a slam dunk pick at fifth round, especially late in the fifth. He actually just went off the board, as did JSN, who I mean, I guess I get it, right? Especially in best ball drafts, playoffs, rookies perform better second half of the season. Taking JSN this early seems a bit, and he probably is being overdrafted based on projections, Chris. But I imagine, projections don't capture the true upside of most of his production probably coming in the second half where the points are more important. So Kenneth Walker really quickly just went drafted, and now I have no correlation plays. Best player on the board for you. We got 20 seconds.
Looking at what is available here, Brian, I am pretty high. I mean, I was just talking about him. I'd say Mike Evans. I'm pretty high on the Bucks wide receivers this year. That's kind of where I'm leaning.
Okay. I panicked. I took Tyler Lockett, who is a little bit
I'm
above
totally
ADP.
okay with that for the correlation. If that's what you want to maximize, we can go that route as well. And then that puts us live to consider, I guess, things we want to look at here, just considering the players you have. Uh, well, Geno Smith, I guess, would be the best quarterback to prioritize. We've got a laundry list
God, yeah.
of interesting quarterback choices behind that correlate with your players. Maybe Daniel Jones at ADP we could look at. That's
Yep.
kind of an interesting quarterback running back stack there, Brian. But I guess this is a good point to talk about ambiguous quarterback rooms. We've got an injury situation with Arizona. We've got some uncertainty with what direction Washington's going to go. How do you treat these quarterback rooms in these contests, especially when we're drafting way too early?
I know, man. It's tough. All right, so really quickly, let me make this pick here.
Yep.
Um,
I kind of like Miles Sanders if he is still there for you. And of course, there
he
he
just
goes.
went, just went.
Um,
So, what do you think about Pitts this year? Is he going to bounce back? Is he going to score more than one touchdown on American soil?
it feels like it is crazy not to take the over there, right? We're a little behind ADP now. Is he falling here to
Yeah, he's
us?
falling. So
So
I'm gonna draft him here, behind ADP. Give us a tight end,
okay,
and that's kind of speaks to the
and
next point I was thinking when your question about quarterbacks
yep.
here is, um, so obviously with no transactions, you can't go into the season or can't leave your draft with just a two quarterback roster that has a question mark at quarterback because all it takes is one benching, falling out of favor, and now you could put up zeros at the most important position. So I think if you take any quarterback that has any question mark, you have to end up with a three quarterback room. I think the same goes with tight ends, right? Unless you have a stud tight end, you got to take 3 to 4.
What do you think? I don't know, and truthfully, I don't know exactly how your team panned out with Ken over the weekend about a player like Anthony Richardson at quarterback, and how do we treat a player like that in these contests?
Yeah, yeah. So funny enough, you say that we actually did draft him on Sunday,
Okay.
and he was. I think I mean, I know you are high on him, and obviously we know the impact of rushing ability for fantasy purposes, and he could be, and if not, is definitively the most dynamic rushing prospect at quarterback to come into the league ever. And to me, he makes a ton of sense for rosters that you have one or two and maybe more teammates of his opponents in the playoff weeks, which is what we ended up doing. I forget the exact team we had, but if Anthony Richardson is putting up 30, 40 points, mostly coming from the ground, we're not getting a ton of production or correlation from his own teammates, but that forces the opponents to play catch up and try to score. And so I really like pairing him with his opponents and not necessarily trying to auto stack him with his own teammates.
And I 100% agree. I think the production within his own team gets reduced a little bit if he sucks those fantasy points into his own production through rushing, right? But we have Kyle Pitts on our roster now, and that is a week 16 correlation with Anthony Richardson. So we are entering that part of the draft where he is on the board. So I don't know if that's something you're already potentially considering here on this roster where we're already sort of cornering ourselves into considering weaker quarterbacks in general just because they correlate with our best assets at pass catcher, right?
Yeah, and just in general, this roster doesn't open itself up to a lot of quarterback pass catcher correlation outside of the late round Kyler Murray, outside of Geno Smith. So it's not completely dead there. I do like that. The other guy I'm really eyeing here is uh, James Conner. Not only for the correlation, but I think he's
Okay.
just an excellent ADP value.
No, really no meaningful competition that we can be aware of on May 24th, anyway, for James Conner. I think we still have Darrell Williams, Corey Clement, Keontae Ingram there at running back on the roster. So hard to see his volume changing. I think the concern is efficiency when we have the combination of something like Colt McCoy or rookie Clayton Tune, I believe it is, playing quarterback for a few weeks here.
Good lord. Yeah. So I
But
just I just took him.
that
So that
okay.
so now we have two Arizona players. Just really quickly, remind me who Arizona plays because maybe that opens up some more correlation that we didn't initially consider.
Got the Cardinals going against the San Francisco 49ers, Chicago Bears, and AJ Brown's Philadelphia Eagles in the playoffs.
Okay, so the Eagles were the ones we were initially looking for. So we have some San Francisco backdoors. Not really sure we'll take any Chicago Bears in this lineup, but interesting nonetheless. All right, so we'll see if Anthony Richardson can hold off because I do like him here. And we got a couple picks before ours, but if not, let's see here. Really not a ton of other players that stand out to me from either a correlation or an ADP perspective. Anybody stand out to you besides A. Rich?
Um, go back over to the rankings here. Let's see. This is where I'm interested in taking more shots on what I'm high on by projection and not necessarily ADP. There are players that I'm taking way ahead of consensus. Like I'm already considering players like Juju Smith-Schuster with the Patriots at this point, even though his ADP is probably about 20 picks after this, because I think he's one of the few remaining wide receivers at this point in the draft who can give you double-digit fantasy points on average with spike week potential as the clear wide receiver one candidate on the Patriots. So that's definitely one guy I'm high on here. Obviously, James Conner was, I think, a really, really good pick here. Looking at what else I have.
So really quickly, Richardson is available, and that feels like an easy pick right now for us.
I've got him QB7 on the season. I think he's going to have a chance to average about 21 fantasy points per game. Looking at his small sample, but college efficiency, and then how we can hopefully expect Frank Reich's offense to call plays there, and obviously the rushing volume being what we hope it will be about 20% at least of Colts carries. So I love the pick if that's the direction we go.
All right, so we took
I
Richardson.
really, I really don't think that there's any realistic, non-coach speak reason to expect Gardner Minshew to start over him this year.
Agreed.
I take it you agree, yeah. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we've seen some comments about that in our Discord as well, and I don't think I'm really not worried about that at all. I believe Michael Pittman is gone here. We'll have an opportunity with Richardson to maybe consider like a late round tight end, Brian, or probably a wide receiver 2-3 like Alec Pierce or rookie Josh Downs, excuse me, in like the double digit rounds here if you want to go that route.
That's what we're on the same page. So clearly, you can tell we've done a lot of shows together. That was my next question to you. If you can't secure Michael Pittman with Anthony Richardson, which of those guys at their current ADPs on the Colts do you like pairing the best with Richardson?
Jelani Woods, just because he's free, is probably my favorite, right? It doesn't cost us a lot to get him, and it's at the weakest position on the board. And we're already not expecting a ton of production in the passing game from this Colts offense. So I think it's a high reward, like no risk bet, in my opinion. I mean, how much production are you really getting out of a round 17, 18 pick, anyways, right? So that's
True.
kind of how I look at it. I will say, just really quickly, Pierce and Josh Downs, they're not players that I'm considering if I don't have Anthony Richardson, if that makes sense. Like I'm not high on them for any math related reason. It's just the power of that correlation of having their quarterback that puts them on my radar.
Totally agree. Totally agree. All right, so as we chug along here in round one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, round 9. If you're watching this and you aren't signed up for Underdog Fantasy, make sure you do. You can use promo code Occupy when you sign up. Get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Start drafting best ball teams. Get a free $100 to do that. Best way to do it. Practice with someone else's money. Can't beat that. So use promo code Occupy. We'll be doing these drafts 3 times per week, all the way up until the season starts. We'll really kick into gear in July and August. And yeah, I'm super pumped to get into the streets here. And I know there's an Underdog show, Chris, and maybe we'll get a sternly worded email from them after the show if they watch this. But we got to talk about other sites as well. DraftKings, I know we get a lot of questions from our members on DraftKings as well. I've been collecting some tickets to their 555 best ball through DFS contest over there, and I think that's a really good way as we head towards the slower part of the DFS summer to really try to aim to get tickets to whether it's DraftKings ones or as you talked about in your previous shows. I think it was the one I was on where you do the pick'em slips here on Underdog to try to get some cash to enter these contests.
100%. Playing best ball really anywhere that you can, that you think is the best for you as a player, is totally fine. DraftKings, competitor here to Underdog, does offer PPR format bonuses like in their DFS products. So it's the same players, obviously the same league, but it's basically an entirely different game theory wise, scoring wise. So I think a little bit different strategy for those types of things. And I'm sure we'll have some things for users for those types of contests to consider through the Discord throughout the summer here.
Yeah, and
Pick'em slips, we've run a little cold here with the NBA games of the last couple of weeks, but it's going to bounce back for sure.
and as Dave,
Definitely.
just really quickly, and as Dave Chappelle famously said in one of his stand-ups, Cokes paid me most recently, so Cokes tastes the best. And so Underdog has paid us most recently, so they're the best place to play best ball fantasy football. So, Chris, we are one spot away from us. I do have Gino cooked up here. We'll see if he lasts one more, going quarterback back to back. It might be a round early, but as I was talking with Ken, give him some advice. This is something I usually would use in season-long traditional formats. These kind of indicator picks, if you look at ADP, guys that go a couple picks before the guy you're targeting, once that player goes off the board, that should be your indicator to take the guy that you want so you don't miss them. For me, that was some of these other quarterbacks right above Geno. So I'm going to take Geno now so we get that
Okay.
correlation with Tyler Lockett and A.J. Brown. Uh, and it's a little more important to secure him here for this tournament format than hoping he lasts one more round.
No, and I think you're kind of referring to the concept of like tier breaks in general, right? Like you watched a player go that to you signaled there was only one player left in that tier that you were interested in. It's totally fine to take that player, especially even if it's a little bit of a read here. He correlates with our roster, so it makes a ton of sense to.
Yes, agree. All right. Any other receivers in this range? Tyler Boyd, Odell Beckham, Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, I mean, I hit on Juju. That would definitely be my favorite.
Okay. And then running backs really quickly too. AJ Dillon, I know we're big fans of him. I drafted him last week. What about? I think he just went off the board actually. The rookie from yeah Miami. Who else we got here? Rashad Penny, Damian Harris. It's slim pickings right now at this point in the draft. Uh,
Yeah,
mm,
if you go back to our, I mean, you don't have to physically go back unless you really want to, but if he's still available, Antonio Gibson is one of the risers on
oh,
the
true.
ADP tracker over the last 7 days. He's really been rising since the contests opened about a month ago. He's my favorite running back left on the board. Like the potential with Eric Bieniemy now being the offensive coordinator there in Washington, coming over from Kansas City. I think Gibson has a chance to be a little bit more dynamic in that offense with him calling plays this year.
Cool, and that's what I just queued up and drafted because that gives us multiple 2-1 Giants Commanders game stacks throughout the season. So with Scary Terry, Gibson, and Saquon. So we'll go ahead and take that. I like that. However, I fell into this trap, and it's not even a trap. It's just really a lack of acknowledgement on my end on Sunday was making sure I didn't draft every single running back from the same goddamn bye week. We're treading carefully here. Saquon week 13, Connor 14, Gibson 14. So I just need to be mindful of these later round picks that they do not fall in the same bye week.
And so we're entering Gibson, I guess, qualifies here, Brian, but ambiguous backfields, right? Where it's not super clear who the best player in fantasy is going to be over a full season. I think there's been some content put out there, most recently by I know a friend of yours, former coworker of yours, JJ Zacharyson over at lateroundqb.com. I think it was some content he put out last season about how ADP tends to be the guide here on who's actually the best player to use in these ambiguous backfields. Do you subscribe to that, or do you have a different kind of approach you take here?
Yeah, so it's funny if you listen to some of JJ's podcast, which is, I mean, he wins awards for good reason. A great podcaster, great fantasy analyst, and he admitted that maybe he perhaps didn't explain that theory to its absolute fullest or the clearest it possibly could be. I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have about this ambiguous backfield theory is that the study was done looking back at basically what a player's ADP was right before the season started. That really
Right.
doesn't tell us much if we're drafted in May, right? Obviously, we have the
Right.
most information that possible, so we could have ambiguous backfields, and let's just say, I don't know here, Rashad Penny. Sorry, I know. Give me an ambiguous backfield right now. Who we got?
Let's say I mean Brian Robinson Jr. and
True.
Antonio Gibson, right?
Okay.
Like that's pretty ambiguous. How about Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, and Devin Achane there with the Miami Dolphins? That feels pretty ambiguous as well.
Yep.
I would consider, I don't know if the field does, Baltimore, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. I consider that fairly ambiguous personally. Um, Chicago, we have Khalil Herbert, Donta Foreman previously of the Panthers,
True.
and then rookie Rashawn Johnson was added this year on day 3 in the draft. So these are, I think, some of the most high upside at Buffalo. Damian Harris, James Cook. Those are probably the best ones to consider.
True. Okay, good point. So we got three teams there, for example, and if we go back to the theory, it's that if we were drafting on September 5th, then whoever is the highest ADP of that running back room on that specific team, that's generally historically has been the best play. That doesn't mean that if they're the highest drafted running back on their team in May that they're the best play because we can get all sorts of offseason movement in their ADP and their ADP could move up. So really, Chris, I think the best way is at this point, if we're drafting in May like psychos, is to just take the player we like the most, the player we think can rise to the top the most, the player we think the field is missing on the most, because whatever information is going to come out, that will come out, and their ADP will be reflected by the time the season starts.
I think that's probably fair. I mean, it's early May. It's not even Memorial Day yet, almost,
Yeah,
but not yet. I will say the one thing to monitor, which is why the tool we have on fantasy.com, would be the trend line.
yeah,
With Washington specifically, we've got Gibson's ADP rising,
true.
and Robinson is kind of staying right where he is or even dropping a little bit. So the indicator there is maybe by September 5th, those two guys will flip. So, but I think your mindset's totally on point there. Do we want to add a third quarterback on this roster that we're building, or are you thinking we take more shots at like a second and third tight end behind Kyle Pitts?
Yeah, that's the
Because I
question.
really think
Possible.
those are the big questions at this point. Yeah,
Totally
I
agree.
really, I don't think there's much reason to ever go more than three quarterback, no matter what your roster looks like. I can be talked into four tight end looking at some of the advancement rate data. I think Chuck actually shared some of this in the Underdog channel in the Discord today. There's some merit to these four tight end builds, probably when we don't have an early round tight end like Kyle Pitts. But other than that, I mean, I think I'm maximizing my running back, wide receiver shots and just getting the bare minimum or close to it at the other positions personally.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I agree with that. I think with Richardson and Gino, like if they suck, then this team's not winning anyways. So
Right. So
I
what's
think,
the point of having a backup plan? You know,
yeah,
yeah.
I think we just roll with these two. God forbid Richardson does not start the season. We'll be in trouble. But we're in trouble anyways if we draft him where he did and he doesn't play a full season. I feel like we need another receiver now with only 4 through 10 rounds or whatever we are now. So best receivers, we could go Alec Pierce to get some correlation here. Or if there's another receiver, Chris, that stands out to you in 20 seconds.
What pick are we right now? What's the number?
We are one. We're in 11th round, 11-9.
All right. We think it's too early to consider someone like our boy Rashid Shaheed because he stands out to me here.
Uh,
We could definitely just go best player available if that's too aggressive for you, but I think he's right there. I like Curtis Samuel as well. Those are some of the guys that aren't close to this ADP yet that would be on my radar already, frankly.
okay, so I went with Shaheed. I think it's a little bit of a reach, but he does offer the correlation we're looking for. Remember, I think it was Saquon. They played the Saints in Week 15. And again, if we're breaking ties here in a point of the season where I haven't done too much studying yet, I'll side on correlation. So we did it with Rashid Shaheed. All right, let's see here. We do need a second tight end as well. Schultz, Komet, Dulcich, Higby, Irv Smith, Jawan Johnson. We could go Jawan Johnson, extra Saints extra Saints correlation here. Any tight ends in this range stick out to you? Because it's starting to get pretty thin pretty quickly, and I don't mind taking shots on 2, 3 of these guys.
Definitely not a week 11 buy, right? Looking at
Oh, yep.
it's there. I like obviously if Dalton Schultz is still here, I think he's head and shoulders the best option left. I think we see ADP probably somewhat influenced, definitely influenced by like Vegas win total expectation, team offensive points scored expectation. Houston players in general are really cheap this year. If we get someone like Schultz here, there's also opportunity to think about some Houston wide receivers. CJ Stroud at quarterback as well. So Houston, Brian, frankly, is one of my favorite teams to consider in the second half of drafts overall.
I love that. I love that. And I just took Dalton Schultz, and yeah, so we'll add him to the mix, and it feels like a safer option. Again, changing teams, obviously, there's always some risk there as well, but for where he is being drafted, I will certainly take that. Good call on the bye week because I almost certainly would have drafted 2 tight ends for the week 11 bye week. Still haven't learned my lesson there. So, roster breakdown: 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 5 receivers, 2 tight ends through 12 rounds. So we need to load up on some running backs and receivers here. Maybe get 1 or 2 more tight ends. We feel set at quarterback. So other running backs, Chris, other receivers, maybe that stick out to you that either you've been drafting a lot or guys that we should be considering more here.
Um, round 13, we're looking at. Let's see here. Let's go through. In round 13 right now, that's perfect. So things are up to date. Rashawn Johnson with the Bears, if he's on someone here, that's my flag plant in that backfield to go with what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Pick a player you like the best and hope that we're correct about it and just lean into that. So that's what I'd be doing with the Bears backfield. Round pick 140 here, which I believe is where we are. I don't mind on rosters where we don't have a player like Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier either. I have Jeff Wilson ranked ahead of Raheem Mostert, myself in the Miami backfield, so that's kind of where I'm at right
Okay, I agree on Algier. I really like that. We also have the Pitts correlation teams because we know damn well no one else is correlating Atlanta stacks in week 16 to 17, so I always like that. So Algier, of course, Roshan already went 1 pick right before us. We still got a few more picks before us. I do like Algier. I got him loaded up here, but of course I said it out loud, so very
now.
unlikely
He'll
he
probably go,
remains.
right?
So uh,
What do you think about Devin Singletary being added to that Texans backfield with Damian Pierce, player that obviously I think when Showdown rolls around, do you think that he has any meaningful chance to do some damage here in this backfield?
yeah, I guess he could. They just feel like similar players, right? Like not super explosive, not uh, metrics beast by any means, um, and on a bad team. Now, can
Yeah,
Singletary take the pass catching role there that they tried to get Burkhead in last year? Sure, and maybe that can give him some value, or just simply if Damian Pierce goes down. I mean, we're looking. I mean, these guys are being drafted where they are for a reason. Of course, Algier goes 1 pick right before us, so that is fantastic. Singletary, Tank Bigsby is another guy that's interesting. Jalen Warren. These are all guys that are going to need an injury probably to have value. Um, let's see here.
yeah. I mean, do we have to take running back here?
No,
What's wide receiver look like?
I'm actually. You know what? I'm going to take Jaden Reed for
Okay,
Green Bay, who I do like a
interesting.
lot.
Okay, so that would put you on the exact opposite side of Chuck. I know we've talked about Jaden Reed on a couple of shows. I don't know if you've caught any of that dialogue at all. I think we're just concerned with what Green Bay looks like in the
Yeah.
post Aaron Rodgers era and how quickly does Jaden Reed rise to the top of the pecking order there. I don't mind the pick. Obviously, we're playing a tournament. It's totally fine to do anything you want, especially this late in the draft. I just feel like Dobbs and Christian Watson are probably by far the safer picks.
For sure. Totally agree there. We'll see here. We got 2 more picks before us. So let's see here. Do we go Josh Downs to pair with Anthony Richardson? Uh, let's see here. Josh Downs is available, so we could go him and get some correlation with Anthony Richardson, which I do like.
I think that's fine then. I think we can definitely do that. Purely because we have Richardson and it gets us a little bit of correlation there. and we still have a chance to double stack with a tight end late with the. Well, it would be a double up on the week 11 by tight end, which might be, but we could still consider it if we want to.
For sure. And again, maybe Reed turns into nothing, right? Maybe he's just a typical Green Bay receiver, doesn't do a ton in his first year. I guess Watson and Dobbs are bad examples for that theory, but we're looking for guys who I know Chuck has mentioned explicitly, guys like Jameson Williams, who may not have a high advance rate because of them missing 6 games to start the year, but potentially being GPP winners, tournament winners in the playoff weeks when they got their feet under them and they're back on the field. I think
Right.
a lot of this goes for later round rookie wide receivers too. You just have to build your roster in the sense that how can my team survive or even excel until Jaden Reed becomes a legitimate option in Green Bay's offense? I think pairing him with someone like Tyler Lockett makes a ton of sense. Where Lockett to start the season is probably in two wide receiver sets, and maybe that changes as the season goes on and JSN takes over. Right? These types of basically covering your own ass on your own team, I think makes a ton of sense in
Right.
these types of formats.
I will say, I think it again. It will be a little early, but I have started taking favorite wide receiver left is probably in another kind of ambiguous wide receiver two slot wide receiver offense with upside. It's McCole Hardman with the Jets coming over from Kansas City. I think there's a tremendous amount of upside there if he is the starting wide receiver in the slot for Aaron Rodgers. These are players that I'm willing to take shots on at this point in a draft, and I think it makes a ton of sense to if you're going to make bets on players like this late in the draft, maybe just maximize your exposure to them. I tend to draft a lot of the same players in these rounds because they're the players I'm highest on. And again, if I'm wrong, I'm probably screwed anyway across my portfolio of lineups, Brian. So I want to treat this like a super high risk tournament, which it is, and maximize my exposures.
Yeah, that was my next question too. Um, and let's see how many picks we got until mine. There's probably a mathematical answer here. We still have 10 picks until us, or 9 picks until us. I got some running backs queued up here. So Jalen Warren, Jeff Wilson. Jalen Warren's immediately, like literally immediately, as his name escapes my mouth, has been taken off the board. But Chase Brown, Jeff Wilson, Tajay Spears, just some,
It's ugly down here, man.
yeah,
This would be maybe time to start looking at maybe about a round early. But Jerome Ford, our
oh
highest
yeah,
riser in the tracker, is this is right around the time to start thinking about that as well at running back. If you're interested in that, obviously we think the Browns are going to be pretty run heavy in general. So if anything happens to Nick Chubb, that's how Jerome Ford turns into a home run pick. These are not math based fantasy football picks. Players like this, right? We're drafting them for their upside in the event that we get the series of events that leads to their success.
totally agree. Totally agree. Let me see. There was one more here that was interesting to me. Oh, Gus Edwards, we mentioned earlier. I think, obviously he can have some
Yeah.
big weeks
Yep. I
in these
like him a lot.
tournaments. All right, so I got some running backs queued up. Anyways, that goes back to my point or my question about what is optimal from an exposure standpoint. And obviously, I try to tie everything back to DFS, Chris, because that's my bread and butter. So if you think,
Yep.
I guess so if you let's just say you 150 max one of these contests, the Best Ball Mania, for instance. What does your highest exposure look like? Is it 30%, 40%, maybe 50%? Because you still have to be a lot of people. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people here. So yeah, that's the interesting question is how much exposure is too much exposure, and really how many guys you want to mix in. Because I really don't mind just hammering the same guy over and over and over early. Because obviously, as news comes out, as boards change throughout the offseason, throughout the summer, you'll start to get more exposure to other guys as well.
Mhm. Yeah, like Hardman's an auto pick for me right now in the 13th round or later if he's still available. But maybe as news changes, we were in OTAs. If there's some hype about Hardman clearly being like the best wide receiver on the field, like that ADP is not going to stay the same.
Right.
It's going to be harder to pick him, and then there will be other values on the board because of how the board is changing. So it definitely is something that will take care of itself to some degree throughout the summer. You're 100% correct there.
Yeah, especially as you start drafting this early. Like if you're doing all 150 of your drafts in August, it's like okay, now you have to be more conscious about
That
who you're
would
taking
be
late. But now instead, you can hammer these guys and you're able to adjust your portfolio over a longer time frame. So, all right,
yeah.
so
I will say that's why I like in some degree, starting our drafts at this point, doing like 3 or 4 a week throughout the entire offseason here helps spread that out.
For sure.
What do you, obviously, we need running back badly. So, I mean, what, obviously, best player available in your mind is totally fine with me. Highest one in this group, it's definitely Jeff Wilson would be the pick for me, Brian. Honestly, feel a little gross, but we saw alternating spike weeks with Wilson and Raheem last year. I'm not personally treating Devin Achane seriously mentally yet. Still think it's going to be Mostert and Wilson to start the year here. We've seen Mike McDaniel when he was with the Niners, and Kyle Shanahan's offenses treat these rookies kind of like players that they don't really even care to use too much early for several years now. I feel like that's a real risk with Achane here.
Yeah, that whole backfield is very tricky, right? We don't know how it's going to play out. I actually took Chase Brown, who, to be fair, I don't know much about, right? I know he maybe popped in some pre-draft models. There is an opening there behind Joe Mixon with Samaje P. Ryan gone. But this may be a guy, Chris, that I take now, and then as OTAs happen, as training camp comes around, and it's like, oh, shit, he's actually the running back 4 behind Travion Williams and Chris Evans, right? And this is a throwaway pick.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he shows up and he comes into camp as the running back 2, and we get a little bit of value here. I don't know. This is why these types of situations in particular are so volatile early on. Is why we see so much ADP, whether it's value or overpay, when it comes to May drafts, just because there's really not much information known about
Yeah.
these situations.
But if you're right, it has a chance to have a tremendous amount of upside. I think the best example last year was obviously Damian Pierce at
Yep.
this point in the calendar exactly a year ago.
Yep.
I don't think he was really being drafted at all. So these types of situations can pay off when we're correct. Admittedly, that's a low percentage result. I don't mind Chase Brown, though. I think he's clearly got the leg up to be Joe Mixon's primary backup. And then, heaven forbid, anything happens to Mixon, you're set up pretty well here with him.
Yeah. This team is, I mean, I got to say, it's pretty gross if we just talk about it, right? Like, we talk about Richardson, rookie. Geno could be a flash in the pan. He'll write us back if we write him off. Don't worry about that. Running back room, Barkley, potentially past his prime. Connor on a really bad team. Gibson, they hate him. Ford, running back 2. Chase Brown, potentially running back 4. Then we have DeAndre Hopkins, no quarterback to start the year. Scary Terry, really no quarterback at all. Tyler Lockett could be pushed out. Very volatile here. So I would not be shocked, Chris, if this team finishes in the bottom 2 of our league. But we got enough correlation, and we picked most of these guys a little bit above ADP. So feels like a really boom-bust roster.
Yeah, we're not playing to finish in 5th, 6th, 7th place here. So I'm actually okay with that kind of approach. Most of my rosters end up that way. If I'm looking at how my teams performed throughout the season, and I have the, let's say 20 to 25% of my teams finish in the top 3, and 20 to 25% of them finish in the bottom 3. Obviously, that would be right in line with the base rate, but I'm willing to live with those outcomes because that's what we're playing for. I don't want to play for the middle, right? So
Totally agree. And I have one guy here queued up. I will not say his name out loud since everybody is watching this show apparently. So got one guy queued up that is very correlated. We'll keep him in mind. But what tight ends in this round? We have Pitts with an week 11 bye, Dalton Schultz week 7 bye. Which of these tight ends at this gross bottom of the barrel tier do you like the most?
Dude, it's slim pickings out here. I'm not gonna present myself as some soothsayer on tight end 36 or anything like that, but I do like Mike Gesicki. Unfortunately, we have a little bit of a bye week 11, but I've started taking him a little bit more with the Patriots. We've also got his teammate Hunter Henry super late. That's basically free that we can consider. Let's see here. I don't know much about him. Michael Mayer, the rookie with the Las Vegas Raiders, would be another player that goes right around here. I haven't taken him yet. I've been thinking about it, and we do have some correlation with Las Vegas we might want to consider with Anthony Richardson. The other player that the Raiders brought in was Austin Hooper, a longtime vet in the NFL. Definitely has some end zone upside, tends to get targeted a lot in the end zone, regardless of what team he's played for over the years. So those are some guys I'd be looking at. Robert Tonyan with the Chicago Bears is another interesting addition. He's basically free. So there's definitely guys with upside here, Brian, but I'm not going to lie to you. down here.
Man, it's bad here. I went with Noah Fant because we have Gino, right? So
Okay,
Fant
that
not
makes sense.
not great, but maybe we get a stealing game from Gino in the playoffs and Fant catches a touchdown. So we'll take that. Receiver, equally as gross. I think I got to take our boy who we think is undervalued. And this speaks to your McCole Hardman point. This speaks to some of these other guy points that if you're at this point in the draft in May, hammer them until news proves otherwise. And that's Richie James.
100%. We're on the same page there. I think he's the leading candidate to be the slot wide receiver there. We saw him post some really good numbers with Daniel Jones last year, and I guess somewhat disrespect intended to Daniel Jones. Patrick Mahomes, significantly better quarterback than Daniel Jones. Obviously, the Chiefs really liked what they saw from James on film last year enough to bring him in, and I think he's going to compete and have a really good chance to earn a primary slot role with Patrick Mahomes' offense this year.
All right, man, we are done. This team, I need a
My
shower
God.
after drafting this team. I
Yeah,
do not
I
feel
hear you.
great about it. Anything that we think we
Which
could have done
means
differently
it.
or could have been better prepared when it comes to this draft, or you think it's just how the board fell and some of the decisions we made?
I will say personally, I do when I'm drafting. I don't know what you do, Brian. Not just like it's different on a stream. I think we're
Yes.
adjusting to that as a content provider, as a site. All of us. This is kind of our first time doing drafts live on streams. I tend to have a couple of different tabs open on my monitors.
Yeah.
I'm working off of a spreadsheet and I'm tracking the players that are going off the board, and I'm kind of highlighting guys. I have my so like in the first 5 or 6 rounds, right? If I'm taking looking at your team here, AJ Brown, Jender Hopkins, Terry McLaurin, Saquon, early, I'm already highlighting, okay, what are the correlated teams here? What are the correlated quarterbacks I want to consider? And I'm doing a little bit of what I call lapping out the rest of my draft, right? It's hard for us to do that on a show while we are talking about, our game theory thoughts, while we're answering questions from the thousands and thousands of viewers that we have. So, like, it's definitely something that's not as practical to advocate for as a content provider, but for the viewers and for anybody who watches the stream back, I think it's important to think about your process when you sit down to dedicate an hour like we have to a fast draft. Because I think there's a lot more to it than just firing up the website and working off your rankings list. I think you have to look at the big picture of where your roster is headed as you develop it. But it's not something you're going to know before the draft starts because your strategy is going to be dictated by the players that you have in those first 4 or 5 rounds. That's, I guess it's a lot. It's definitely a long-winded answer, but that's how I tend to treat every single draft. Actively thinking about, okay, what makes sense from a big picture for this roster, and it was some of the things we talked about here tonight. We took AJ Brown. We talked about his playoff opponents. We talked about that for basically every player after that in those first few rounds, and I do think we did a good job of correlating with those players here.
I think so too. And I think we'll close out the show here with two final points that just build off of what you said, Chris. And one is start doing some of these drafts. Again, promo code Occupy, get that 100% deposit match bonus up to $100 to start doing these drafts. Because the more you do, the more comfortable you will feel, the more comfortable you will feel
Mhm.
with the structuring of stacking in these drafts. And again, it'll become second nature to you. And you'll find different ways to be more productive and be more efficient as you do these drafts. Just the more you do. That's just human nature. Secondly, we will have our Stack Seeker tool up very soon on the site in addition to the ADP tracker. Basically, what that will do, you'll be able to type in a player's name or a team, and it'll pop up all the ADPs for these week 15, 16, 17 guys that I was trying to have Chris do off the top of his head, and I was trying to memorize myself. Instead, we'll have one tab where we can do all that. It'll make stacking and mapping out your draft a lot easier. So look forward to that in the coming days on OccupyFantasy.com. So that'll do it for this stream. Appreciate you tuning in or watching this on replay. Not many people watch it live. We do appreciate you if you watch it live and tune in, but we do get a lot of people watching on replay, which we do appreciate as well. So follow Chris on Twitter at RooneyFFB. Follow me at BrianJesterFF. Chris will be back with Chuck on Friday night to do another stream. Chris, thanks for joining me, man. I appreciate it, and good luck to you if you do any drafts over the coming week.
Thank you, Brian. Same to you. Looking forward to the next time.
Peace.